Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. Welcome to the October Conservative Women's Network. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Clare, Boothe, Luce Center for Conservative Women. You know, this year is the 30th anniversary of the Luce Center. We've been preparing and promoting women to become conservative leaders for our country for 3 decades now. And we do this at events across the U.S., like our upcoming Student Summit next week in Santa Barbara. We're going to have many, many young women come and hear from some of the best conservative women leaders in the country. We have campus lectures. We have a full semester paid internships and summer internships too. Other campus programs, social media blogs, and lunches like this. This monthly lunch, the Conservative Women's Network, began over 23 years ago, bringing women from DC, Virginia, Maryland, sometimes further, to hear America's best women leaders discuss key issues. Today, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Christiana Kiefer, who will be discussing religious liberty cases that she and ADF, which is Alliance Defending Freedom, have fought tirelessly to defend. Alliance Defending Freedom has spearheaded the fight for religious liberty, free speech, the sanctity of life, marriage, family, and parental rights, and has won many U.S. Supreme Court cases, including the overturn of Roe v. Wade and Burrell v. Hobby Lobby. Christiana served as a senior counsel with ADF, joining the staff in 2012. She's now a key member of the ADF's Center for Conscience Initiatives. Christiana worked to defend the constitutionally protected freedom of churches, religious schools, and Christian ministries to exercise their faith without government interference. She's worked on many, many groundbreaking cases to protect the rights of women and girls to fair athletic competition. She also works to protect the rights of women, of people of faith, to foster and provide loving homes for children in need. She's had multiple appearances on leading networks like Fox News and Newsmax, and regularly comments in radio and print media as an ADF commentator. Christiana is admitted to the State Bar of California, the District of Columbia, the U.S. Supreme Court, and numerous federal and appellate courts. She earned her Juris Doctor in 2010 from Oak Brook College of Law and Government Policy in Fresno, California, and graduated first in her class. She's been married for 1.5 years. She's pregnant with her first child, due in the spring. She's been in DC for about 8 years now, and she's heavily involved, especially in women's sports issues. Now, following today's talk and some questions and answers, I hope you'll join us right outside for some lunch. Please join me now in welcoming Christiana Kiefer.
All right, well, it is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm just going to tab this over here. But again, thank you so much for having me and for spending a little time with us today. It's my pleasure today to talk with you this afternoon about religious liberty cases, and especially a number of cases that intersect at the point of gender identity, which is becoming an increasing conflict across our culture in today's day and age. But before we get started there, I just want to reflect a little bit on the fact that religious liberty is our first freedom, and it's for good reason. It's the foundation on which a thriving, pluralistic society and all other civil liberties rest. Religious freedom is more than just the freedom to worship within the confines of your own home or within the walls of your house of worship. It means the freedom to live and work consistently with your faith and your deeply held religious convictions. No one should have to go against their core beliefs in order to go to school, to get a job, and to participate in the public square. And the beauty of religious freedom is that it's not just an American right. It's an inherent human right that we all have by virtue of being created in the image of God and designed to be in relationship with Him. But in an increasingly post-Christian and anti-Christian culture, some have questioned whether religious freedom has any value at all. They don't realize that religious liberty is that social buffer that allows us to live peacefully and harmoniously with those with whom we disagree, rather than under a government-imposed orthodoxy. It allows us to say, you know, I disagree with your beliefs, but I respect your right to hold them, even if I think they're crazy or illogical and make no sense at all. So if you're thinking about how do we talk about defending religious freedom in our generation and in our culture, I like to think about 5 quick benefits of religious freedom before we really dig into the cases. Number 1, religious freedom ensures that everyone has the freedom to explore the meaning of life, who we are, where we come from, what our purpose is, and how we should then live as a result of the answers that we find. It allows us to order our lives according to the answers that we find. It's the freedom to think, express, and peaceably act upon our deepest convictions. Number 2, did you know religious freedom contributes to economic growth and a healthy society? According to a 2016 study, religion and religious organizations contribute $1.2 trillion with a T, dollars annually to the American economy. That's more, by the way, than the annual revenues of Apple, Amazon, and Google combined. There are an estimated 350,000 religious congregations across the United States that operate things like schools, pregnancy centers, soup kitchens, drug addiction programs, homeless shelters, and adoption agencies. They serve well over 70 million Americans every year. And typically they do so in a way that has a more lasting impact and is cheaper than if the government were to do it itself. Number 3, religious freedom fosters political stability and strengthens national security. History and frankly even current events show that countries that diligently protect religious liberty experience less poverty, less war, less violence, and more political stability than those countries that do not. Number 4, religious freedom empowers women and minority groups. Religious liberty increases the status of women and protection to vulnerable minorities that might otherwise be oppressed and silenced. Frankly, I think that's rather readily illustrated by Afghanistan before the Taliban and after the Taliban. Look at the status of women and their current situation now. And number 5, religious liberty undergirds our other civil liberties. It is the foundation upon which our other civil liberties rest, and in many respects is a prerequisite for them. Countries that protect religious freedom are more democratic, they have more robust freedoms of speech, freedoms of press and assembly. I personally witnessed this when I traveled to a Southeast Asian country about 10 years ago to work with a persecuted church and was in a country that had no religious freedom. They also had no economic liberty, no freedom of the press, no freedom of speech. Their women were oppressed. And it really helped me to visualize the flow-down effects of not protecting that first freedom. Religious freedom has been called the canary in the coal mine. So when it is under attack in a civil society, you know that other freedoms are under attack and at risk as well. So religious freedom is incredibly valuable and it is worth defending. But I'm afraid that for many of us, we're busy with our day-to-day lives, we're doing our thing. We're not really thinking about the threats to religious liberty unless they become personal to us, unless we encounter that in our day-to-day life. But you'll recognize that as the government passes more laws, it intrudes into more areas that used to be governed by private decisions. And so there are more and more opportunities for conflict between a person's religious freedom and between government mandates and government orthodoxy. And I think, frankly, that is readily illustrated in the area of gender identity today. Gender identity is a relatively new phenomenon in the grand scheme of things, new cultural phenomenon, but it has had a remarkably fast impact on the current legal landscape across America. So my goal today is to highlight for you a few of the lawsuits that Alliance Defending Freedom is currently litigating in the area of religious liberty at the intersection of gender identity, and talk to you a little bit about the, categories of threats and pressure points that we are currently seeing to our freedoms. So, pressure point number 1, maybe we'll stick this up here. That might be a little easier. Pressure point number 1 is the right of people of faith to foster and adopt children. There are few religious practices that have distinguished Christians for centuries, like the practice of caring for children in need. But the ability of Christians across America to actually foster and adopt children who need a forever home is being questioned simply because they hold to a biblical sexual ethic. Jessica Bates is a widow and a mother of 5 children in Eastern Oregon. She tragically lost her husband back in 2017 after a head-on collision, and it really was her faith in God and her local church community that helped her to weather that tragedy and be able to move forward. Well, one day she was in the car driving to work. She's an ultrasound technician, and she heard a radio program talking about caring for orphans and the call from James especially to care for widows and orphans, and she thought, that's something that I need to do. I feel like the Lord is calling me to do this. So she began the process of adoption in the state of Oregon, and she specifically was looking for a sibling pair who was 9 years old or younger, younger than her youngest biological child. But unfortunately, she pretty quickly found out that the state of Oregon disapproved of her beliefs regarding marriage and human sexuality. Because according to state rules, anyone seeking to adopt must accept and support the sexual orientation and gender identity of any child the state might place in their home. Well, that, according to the state of Oregon, meant that parents must agree to use a child's pronouns, whatever they choose, take a child to pride parades, display LGBT flags and paraphernalia within their home, facilitate a child's access to dangerous pharmaceutical interventions like puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, interventions that could permanently sterilize a young child. It also meant that she couldn't take this child to any religious services, to services at her church, if it didn't mean unquestioning affirmation of whatever the child's preferences might be. Well, Jessica, of course, as an incredibly capable and loving mother of 5 children, said she'd be glad to care for any child and accept any child for who they are, but she wasn't going to be able to say anything that would conflict with her religious convictions about marriage and human sexuality. Keep in mind, she was open to accepting an infant, any child age 9 and younger. We'll just leave that there. But regardless, the state of Oregon denied her application because of her religious views. So without a specific child in view, the state of Oregon applied an ideological litmus test and deemed Jessica categorically unfit to care for one of the thousands of children currently languishing in the Oregon foster system. Ironically, Oregon readily accommodates people of other religious and cultural backgrounds, right? It tries to pair children with families that are going to be a good fit for each other. It isn't going to try to force a devout Jew to have Hindu temple literature in their home or require Muslim families to adapt to the meat-eating preferences of a child that's placed with them, right? No, generally the government is going to respect the religious and cultural values of both the family and the child being placed in their care. Jessica, though, was not considered capable or qualified to care for a child even from her own religious congregation. So Alliance Defending Freedom has filed a federal lawsuit on Jessica's behalf to protect her religious freedom to adopt and access adoption services on the same basis as everyone else, and frankly, to ensure that children in need have access to an incredibly loving home like Jessica wants and desires to provide for them. That case is still in the very early stages, but I want you to be aware these are becoming increasingly common across the U.S., unfortunately so. Category number 2 is the right of people of faith to participate in the public square, including owning businesses without sacrificing their religious convictions. I hope all of you are familiar with Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado and his 7-2 Supreme Court victory back in 2018. For those of you who are less familiar, Jack had declined a same-sex wedding cake request. So he was asked to create a custom design cake for a same-sex ceremony that conflicted with his religious convictions to create. And he explained to the couple that, look, I'd be happy to bake you and create a custom birthday cake or anything else. Just can't do a wedding cake. I'll sell you anything else in my shop, but I cannot do this custom design work for this particular event because of the message. Nevertheless, the couple filed a complaint, and the state of Colorado prosecuted Jack all the way up to the United States Supreme Court for living consistently with his faith, and they even called his beliefs despicable and thought they were analogous to the Nazis. Well, thankfully, the United States Supreme Court recognized the impermissible religious hostility of the state of Colorado towards Jack and people like him, and recognized that that violated the First Amendment's guarantee of free exercise of religion, and ruled in his favor with a resounding win. But unfortunately, the attacks on Jack have not stopped, Before he even won his first Supreme Court case, an attorney called Jack's shop and asked for a custom cake. The attorney specified that he wanted a cake that was blue on the outside and pink on the inside, and specifically explained that that was to celebrate the attorney's gender transition from male to female. Well, Jack respectfully declined that request because he couldn't, in good conscience, create that artwork celebrating that message. And that attorney took legal action against him not once, but twice in the intervening time frame. This was a targeted attack on Jack Phillips. The latest lawsuit that he is currently facing seeks monetary damages and attorney's fees from Jack that, if it's successful, will bring about financial ruin for Jack and his family. But that's completely absurd. It is mind-boggling to think. I mean, Jack serves everyone. He welcomes people of all backgrounds and faiths into his shop. He will gladly serve people from all walks of life. But as a creative professional, and this is typical across creative professions, he cannot just express every single message that is requested of him. He can't celebrate every event he's asked to. For example, Jack does not create cakes celebrating Halloween, or violence, or anti-American messages, or divorce, or cakes that denigrate other people. He wouldn't create any of those things. And it is his right as a creative professional to make those choices, to make those decisions. He does not deserve the cruelty of over a decade of litigation simply for trying to peacefully run his business in a way that's consistent with his faith. No American should endure that type of bullying or be banished from the marketplace because of what they believe. Well, in January of this year, the Colorado Court of Appeals ruled against Jack and said that custom artwork is not protected speech. But the Colorado Supreme Court, just this past week, has agreed to hear his case. And this case ought to be readily dealt with in light of the Supreme Court's recent decision and fabulous win in 303 Creative. So we will see. But I also just want you to be aware there are numerous creative professional cases yet pending that still need to be resolved. Did you know that you could be kicked out of a farmer's market for what you believe? Random, right? That's exactly what happened to Steve Tennis, pictured here on the slide. Steve Tennis owns a popular family business called Country Mill Farms. He and his wife are devout Catholics. They are military veterans. And for years, they've brought their produce 22 miles away to the East Lansing, Michigan farmers market, where they are a rather popular vendor. Well, the Tennis family was asked via Facebook whether or not they would use Country Mill Farm, which is their personal family farm, to host a same-sex wedding. And the Tennis family very respectfully responded that, look, we will serve everyone. We welcome everyone to our farm to come pick apples in apple picking season. We'll serve everyone at the farmer's market, of course. But we would have to decline to host a same-sex wedding on our personal family farm because that conflicts with our deeply held religious convictions about what marriage is. It'd be telling a lie about what marriage is. And the city of East Lansing exiled them from the farmer's market because of what they believed and how they were going to operate their personal family farm. And in fact, the city actually went a step further and passed a policy, an unconstitutional policy, specifically to ban the Tennis family from ever coming back to their farmers market. So Alliance Defending Freedoms, representing the Tennis family, sued the city of East Lansing in 2017, and we went to trial, and over 2 years later, justice moves slowly sometimes, the court handed down a decision that said it was unconstitutional and wrong what the city had done in discriminating against this family simply because of their religious convictions about marriage. And so in August, the court ruled that the farmers market must allow them back into the farmers market. So quite excited about that win. Counselors are also at risk in this space. This is Brian Tingley. He's a licensed marriage and family counselor in Tacoma, Washington. And for over 20 years, he's helped adults and couples and teens and children identify and achieve the counseling goals that they set for themselves. He doesn't choose their goals. He helps them achieve the goals they set for themselves, and ones that are consistent with the client's own religious and moral convictions. Many of Brian's clients are also Christians. Many of them come from a similar faith background and share his worldview. And under his guidance, a number of his clients have achieved remarkable success in achieving the goals that they've set. But Brian's counseling practice is currently under threat from a state law in Washington that allows the government to censor private conversations between a counselor and a counselee. The law prohibits any conversation between a counselor and counselee that seeks to help the client achieve comfort with their biological sex. Even for clients who ask for this counseling, who desire to achieve this outcome, and to bring their hearts and their conduct in line with the teachings of their faith, it's illegal. But if you have a client who would like to identify as the opposite sex and wants to be flatly affirmed in that, of course, does not violate the law. The state of Washington has chosen to censor counselors in only one direction and one direction alone. So the law forces Brian to censor his own speech. It violates not just his free speech, but his religious freedom and the rights of his counselee to actually seek the help that they desire, and threatens him with fines of up to $5,000 per incident, suspension from practice, and a loss of his license and livelihood. So Alliance Defending Freedom is representing Brian. We filed a federal lawsuit, lost to the district court. Recently, the Ninth Circuit also ruled against us based on some bad Ninth Circuit precedent. They threw out his challenge and said, it's fine, what you're doing is only conduct, it's not really speech, and it doesn't matter. So Alliance Defending Freedom has filed a cert petition with the United States Supreme Court. That should have been conferenced today. And we hope to hear potentially later today or early next week whether the Supreme Court will take up Brian's case. Because again, this is not happening just in the state of Washington. All across America, we're seeing increasing government laws that are being passed that interfere even with the private counseling conversations between a counselee and their counselor. Category number 3, the right of people of faith to hold jobs and to be employed and to volunteer their time. This is Dr. Andrew Fox. 8 years ago, Dr. Fox created the Fire Chaplaincy Program at the Austin Fire Department. He led a group of volunteer chaplains to serve firefighters, their families, and fire victims, including those who identify as LGBT, all as a volunteer and with no pay. Dr. Fox welcomes and serves everyone. He's worked with all people, and he had a spotless record, 0 complaints. Well, one day on his own personal blog, Dr. Fox shared the fact that men competing in women's sports is unfair due to the biological differences between the sexes that are so clear. Keep in mind, this is a belief that's held by more than 70% of the American people across the country, and it's backed up not only by science, but clear common sense. Nevertheless, a complaint was filed with the fire department against Dr. Fox for holding this outrageous belief that men and women are different. It was brought up to leadership, and they tried to force him to recant his beliefs and apologize for what he had said on his blog. He explained that his only intent was to foster conversation and dialogue on this hotly debated topic that is currently in the news. I mean, even today, yesterday, right? This is a hot current cultural issue. And he was apologized, certainly if anybody was offended by what he said, but he was not going to recant what he had said. But after refusing to walk those back, the fire department fired him from his position. In essence, the city determined that anyone who openly holds the belief that men and women are different were not eligible for a job with the fire department. The city punished Dr. Fox for holding a view contrary to its own that was expressed on his own time, on his own personal blog, and had nothing to do with whether or not he was capable of serving firefighters and fire victims well. Americans should be free to speak freely about their beliefs without the fear of government retaliation. So Alliance Defending Freedom is representing Dr. Fox in a federal lawsuit against the city of Austin to protect his constitutional rights, and that case is still at the district court in the very early stages. If any profession you think would understand the biological differences between the sexes, it might be healthcare, right? Healthcare. And yet the state of Michigan is forcing healthcare providers to ignore biological sex in favor of radical gender ideology. Since 2017, Christian healthcare centers has provided high-quality primary medical care for the people of Western Michigan, including those who cannot afford it. They're delighted to offer their services for low or no charge for those who qualify. For many people, they are their primary care physicians. They treat the whole person. Their design is to treat not just physical needs, but emotional and spiritual as well. And their doctors and healthcare providers take the time to slow down and pray with their patients and through the spiritual aspects of what they're going through as well, in addition to providing that top-notch medical care. But recently, Michigan courts have reinterpreted Michigan's civil rights law to include sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, that means that Christian healthcare centers must provide cross-sex hormones to a child who requests them. They must, even if it's against their better medical judgment, they must address people with pronouns that are inconsistent with one's biological sex, even though as a healthcare professional, you better believe they know what your biological sex is, and even hire employees that disagree with their faith-based mission. Those requirements, of course, directly threaten the ministry's ability to provide safe and high-quality medical care to every person who crosses through their door. So Alliance Defending Freedom is also representing Christian Healthcare Alliance. We filed a suit against the Attorney General of Michigan, and that case is also currently pending. The final category I want to mention in brief is the right of people of faith to obtain an education and to communicate in school classrooms on the same basis as everyone else. This is Maggie DeJong. She is as sweet as she appears in the pictures. She's an absolute delight. Maggie is a recent graduate of Southern Illinois University's art therapy program. She spent the last 3 years pursuing a master's degree in art therapy with the goal of one day being able to counsel children who have experienced trauma. Maggie, while she was a graduate student, posted materials to her social media sites. She sent messages to her fellow students, engaged in in-class discussions, as everyone else did, on topics ranging from religion to politics to critical race theory to Black Lives Matter, criminal justice system, COVID, Marxism, censorship, all things that she and her classmates were engaging in a dialogue together about. Maggie's beliefs were informed by her Christian and conservative worldview, and they were often not in line with the predominant orthodoxy of the art therapy program faculty and students. Under the art therapy program's anti-oppressive framework and calls for social justice, Maggie's speech was characterized as harmful. The director of the art therapy program actually encouraged Maggie's fellow art students to report her harmful and hateful speech to them, to university officials. And as a result, school officials notified Maggie that 3 students had taken out no contact orders against her and prohibited her from having any contact or even indirect communication with her fellow art therapy students, effectively isolating her and her convictions. Maggie was prevented from speaking to them in their shared class, at their jobs in the same building, and in the public spaces under threat of further punishment from the school. Keep in mind, the university gave her no reason why, didn't identify a single law or policy that she had violated, and did not give her the opportunity to defend herself. So Alliance Defending Freedom attorneys filed a lawsuit on behalf of Maggie against the university, and I'm pleased to note that in July of this year, the school hopefully saw the writing on the wall and agreed to settle her case favorably for her. So these are certainly not the only cases. There are cases pending that I'm aware of Christian schools, for example, that have been kicked out of their state athletic associations. Why? Because they're not going to put their female athletes in a dangerous situation of being forced to compete against a physically superior male who might physically injure them. Certainly, churches have been threatened under a number of these non-discrimination laws as well, threatened with legal action if they operate events consistent with their beliefs about marriage and human sexuality. So, in conclusion, I just want to underscore that the pressures on religious freedom in America continue to mount. And if we want a future that includes a harmonious, pluralistic society, we have to defend religious liberty not just for ourselves, but for those around us as well. Each one of the brave clients that you saw up on the screen today never expected or desired to be in litigation. None of them wanted to get involved in this position. But litigation is one way of holding government officials accountable and pushing back against the censorship and the unjust laws. And it's a way not just of protecting their freedom to continue operating consistently with their faith, but it's a way of protecting that liberty for those in their communities as well. So I hope that each one of us, if called upon, will have the courage to do the same. All right? Thank you all so much.